Hello, and welcome everyone to Building Winning Strategy Decks, the 4-step blueprint. Today, we're going to figure out how to build high-quality strategies faster. We'll be doing a mix of what you can do manually, and then also what you can do using AI to really bring this to life and be able to win more clients. So, just to let you know, I'm Jeffrey Davis. I am a business strategist who's worked for McKinsey doing product strategy. I've worked for IBM doing digital transformation, and I worked for a large corporation doing business transformation. As well, the second half of me is I'm essentially an AI adoption expert. So I've done Gen AI rollouts for billion-dollar clients. I'm the founder of Ascend, which essentially is an AI for consultants and strategists platform. And I've built a database of over 300 prompts and AI agents to help you and everyone else kind of deliver better strategy work. And in my time over the last 10 years in my career, I built probably over 250 strategy decks and proposals. Yeah. So one of the things that I hear most from people when they're actually coming to me and clients are trying to figure out what's going on is there's too much information for them to actually be able to figure out what is exactly the story or the narrative that they're trying to say for their presentations or for their strategy decks to deliver the right output. You've got different projects, you've got clients, you have massive amounts of research, you have benchmarks, everything is all over the place, and you're trying to do everything you can to really wheel it all in to give one succinct narrative. Yeah. And the reality is that the human brain only has so much capacity to store information. So no matter what we try or what we want to do, there's only a limited amount that we can actually take in and try to organize. Now, this is why we have our documents. This is why we have Notion. This is why we have massive stored files to be able to help us really bring that together and organize that data. Now, the problem really comes is that it actually takes quite a lot of time and effort for strategists to put together strategy decks because they have to gather all this data from desk research, current state analysis, stakeholder interviews, competitor benchmarking, then taking all that data, trying to then summarize it into some sort of way that people can understand. So you're creating themes, problems, opportunities, initial hypothesis of what you think you can do as a solution, and then trying to find what are the strategic insights that really make the difference for us and for your story that you're trying to tell. Now, the biggest issue that we see when people are actually trying to do stuff is when they're trying to get to the point of simplifying their narrative, trying to understand what's the presentation outline going to be, what's the real strategic narrative that they should be focusing on, and how do they highlight what are going to be the top key messages as they put together their presentation or deck. Now, that just after that is that very blank page issue if you're trying to write your first draft. So how do I actually start to populate this? How do I make sure the content is correct and in the right hierarchy? All these things take time and they take a lot of effort. So what we're going to go through today is the 4-step blueprint on how the top strategists are using this framework to essentially get higher quality strategy decks faster, right? So let's dive into point number 1 to really bring this out, which is gathering data. This is a massive problem that we've all got, and we're all trying to figure out what's the best way to get all the information that we need. And today, there are some massive issues that we end up finding ourselves in when it comes to using AI and trying to essentially get to the right sources. Because AI will lie to us kind of very confidently almost all the time and try to tell us, hey, these are the numbers or this source is real. And then when you go to click on the link doesn't exist. Or you say cross-reference these numbers, it'll say, oh, I'm so sorry. There are actually 3 of these numbers instead of 4. Then you've got your own time and effort to essentially manually review all of that data. Yeah. And you're trying to extract it from different data platforms, from what is actually coming in, what you've got in your internal system, for what the client has provided you, to what's currently out there in the market, and trying to figure out what's going to be the most reputable information that I can pull in. And the reality is it's hard to keep track of all of those sources and all of that context, right? So the question that you're really trying to ask yourself as you're going through that entire problem is, how do we know what information is important and how do we sift through it? Now, the solution that we essentially come up with, which doesn't actually happen as often as you think it would, is just creating a brief for the project or the strategy that you are trying to put together. Now, what happens most often to me is I'll be talking with a client. I'll be happily say, hey, look, do you mind if I record this so I can put it into my notes? Everyone always says yes. And then I'm talking to my client and they're telling me all this information that most of the time I either do or do not write down. Yeah. And then as my project goes on, I'm trying to remember exactly what each stakeholder said and what they wanted. But there's an easier way for us to start to do this and really to start to distill down what is the request that we're getting from the people that are asking it from us. So when we think about the audience, right, we want to know who exactly is the presentation for? Who is this going to be for? What's the goal that we have? Are we trying to get something approved? Are we trying to get investment? What are the success metrics going to look like if this goes through and this strategy gets launched, right? What's the timeline and scope that I actually have to even work on this strategy or deck? And then what's the timeline and scope of the entire project as we go forward? Then we want to figure out what are the communication preferences for the people we're talking to. Is it a CEO who might be short on time, so they're happy to have highlights in the very front? Is it someone that wants to really deep dive into all the data and understand each and every point that you're talking about? These are things that allow us to really understand what the strategy deck brief is going to be. And on the right-hand side, you see an example of what that looks like. And what I've done to essentially pull that together is I had a transcript that I had from a recording of a client on a call. I uploaded that to CoPilot and then just asked it to, hey, generate me a strategy brief that identifies the audience, the business goal, the success metrics, timeline, and the communication preferences. But now I have this whole brief that I can share with not just myself, but anyone else on my team that's actually helping me put this brief together. Now, the second thing that comes, which is I think very undervalued, is as we're doing all this research and we're trying to keep all this information in our heads, is trying to figure out how I can put together a research repository that I'm going to be able to reference back. Now, when we're all the way at the end where we're starting to do our first draft and we're crafting everything, we're going to need evidence to support every single one of those points. So where are we actually going to store all that information that we pulled together to put together this deck, all the links, all the current state analysis, all the benchmarks? Where are we going to be able to host that so we can get some information? Now, there's a quick AI workflow that you can start to look into, depending on if you're in corporate, so if you're using a Microsoft system, or if you're outside. So I'll start with outside, and then we'll go for if you're inside of a corporate, where you could use Claude, connected to a cool tool called Notion, which essentially is a database, and also the screenshot that you're seeing here. And once it's in Notion, you can be able to search and recall all of your research and data from within that database. I do this very often. It's how I essentially spend most of my time, is just creating all these databases that are exceptionally searchable, right? The second way that you could do that is inside the Microsoft environment using SharePoint. So you could have CoPilot and build a CoPilot agent that immediately connects so that you can actually have SharePoint pull that information or send that information in. And then you'd be able to recall at any point, say, hey, what's that date that I have from last week? Or, hey, can you tell me what the interview with Joanne was like? So I have all that information in one place, right? Easily retrievable. Instead of me having to search through, wasting hours trying to find the right quote or the right piece of information. Yeah. Now, if you take that one step further, we could even build out our own research agent. And this is an example of what that might look like, where you'd be able to combine those two steps of your strategy brief with the research repository and be able to create a research agent that would be able to have all the information in there. So on the screenshot you see on the right, you see I've got all those files from my personal notes, my previous work, my competitor benchmarks, my current state analysis. All those information will host all the information and files that I have. And then that becomes the repository that my research agent can pull from as I continue to do research. But everything is organized in the correct context. So then we don't have to worry about if the AI is going to know where it came from or how it's going to get access to it. So there's an easy way to kind of put that together, which is one, you create your strategy brief. You add that strategy brief into the system. And there's a simple prompt that you can just say, which is, hey, take this strategy I have, please turn it into a system prompt. And you can put that in ChatGPT, Claude, or CoPilot, and it'll get pretty close to something that'll be good enough for you to use, or at least to start out with. If you want something more complex, reach out. We're happy to kind of sort you out and figure out how to get the full structure that you need. Then you can upload all that previous information. You have all your work. Now you can start to chat to that agent, and you're getting all that research that you need to either have it do more research for you that you can then put into the repository, or you can have it retrieve any information that you need. Yeah. So there's a little starter prompt just at the bottom there for anyone that wants. Feel free to screenshot this so you can see it for later, where you can essentially go through and say, look, you're a strategic research specialist who conducts comprehensive research and analysis across multiple work streams. You execute research projects by gathering primary and secondary data, conducting competitive analysis, analyzing the market, trends, synthesizing findings, all into these strategic insights. So now you've got something nice that's able to help you along the way. Now, let's move into step number 2, where you're trying to summarize your findings. So I've got all of this information, and I'm trying to figure out what's the best way for me to distill it down. And we know that one of the most difficult things is trying to find patterns against information from over here, information from a client, information from internally, all these things kind of put together, and you're trying your best to really keep it together. And I think that's really what makes it quite difficult, is trying to put all that stuff together. Now, when you're identifying the research bias in the reports is also a massive one. So if I got something that came from Deloitte or McKinsey, I know they might be trying to sell me something. So how do I adjust to that? And we know there's no way really to connect these insights across multiple sources, right? And really the reality is just too much information for any one person or even a team of people to really process. So that really boils down to one question, which is, how do I make sense of all this information that I've gathered? Yeah. So the way that we approach that when it comes to really building these strategic narratives is thinking about what's the structure of the insights that you need, so that you actually have a filter when you're looking through all the information. So every article I read, every interview I do, everything that I'm looking through these 4 lenses. Can I understand a theme or a pattern that's in here? Can I identify a problem or an opportunity that we could take advantage of? Then I'm thinking about what could be potential hypotheses or solutions based on the data that I'm collecting. And what are the strategic insights that support that data? Because when we move into delivering our first draft, we're going to need to have all of our key messages and anything that's going to support those key messages, whether that's going to be in the main storyline or whether that's going to be in the appendix. Yeah. So there's a quick AI workflow for that as well, which is you could upload all your research, already have it active in your repository. You could create a prompt that essentially just says, hey, structure all of these insights, or look across all the insights that we have, look for themes, problems, initial hypothesis, and strategic insights, and then generate a research insights report, which is an example of what you see on the right-hand side, using Spotify as an example. Now, we can put this all together, again, into an analysis agent, same as a BA that's able to help you out, or a partner to your BA, where they can essentially take the hours and days it's going to take to analyze that and speed things up. And what they're going to be able to do is create an agent that runs this analysis across individual or across all of your research. Now, one of my favorite tools for being able to do this is called Jenova. Claude is also very good, but Jenova is one of the best when it comes to actually doing research externally and also internally in terms of analysis. So inside of each of these tools, you'll see in the bottom right, there's a thing that says edit agent, but there's always a little create or add agent or project in one of those files. Once you open that up, you'll be able to put in a little title and a description. Like you see here, I put business analyst agent and a quick description. Those 2 things don't really matter. They don't affect the outcome. But then you want to paste in your system instructions or prompts, right? So there's a little starter prompt that I have at the bottom here, which is, you're there to do a strategic analysis and transform research data into actionable strategic insights. And it'll go through to say, I want to define key problems, identify key patterns, generate evidence based on my strategic hypothesis. So you have everything you need kind of in there. Now, when we build out these prompts, they're way longer. There's probably about 10 times that. So feel free to message in the chat, and we can happily send you guys a draft of what those look like for you to start to test out in your own agents. So moving on to number 3, when it comes to the blueprint of what we're moving, and that's really simplifying your message. We got to the point where we understand what's being asked of us, who the audience is. We collected all the different data. We've been able to really analyze that and figure out, okay, what are the most important bits that I need from my story? And now we need to figure out how to simplify that message. Now, when I talk to clients and they're trying to tell me what is it actually this is all kind of coming together. One, it's hard to distill all that information and move it into a clear narrative. Not everyone is a visual person. Not everyone is a storyteller, but we are strategists. So how do you all translate that into a number of slides that you actually need to tell that story? How does that actually become translated into the correct thing? How can you actually adjust your presentation message based on the audience you have? Someone may need to see the full 50 pages you've got. Someone may just need to see the 5. So how do you start to flex based on that? Now, that really just distills down to what's the story I'm trying to for this audience. Yeah. Now, for me, as someone who's been doing design, product, strategy for so long, it becomes really clear that there are lots of different ways to tell a story. And the way that we look into solving this problem is we like to choose a narrative first. So what's the story narrative that's going to work for me? So this could be the pyramid method, where I start with my key message, right? Then my supporting arguments, then the supporting data and facts. It could be where I start with SCQA, where I've gone through what's the situation of the landscape, what's the problem, what's the big question that we have, and then how are we going to answer that in terms of the solution? Or if there's something that needs a little bit more narrative, I might be talking to a creative team. Maybe it's customer centric, the solution I'm providing. Maybe I need to think about the hero's journey, where the customer or the employee becomes the heart of that story, and you're walking through the journey that they're going from old world to new world. Now, these are all going to help you craft a great narrative for your strategy deck, whether how detailed or not detailed you need it to be. Now, the big thing that we want to pull from this is when we originally looked at our insights, we pulled the hypothesis and the supporting strategic insights. That essentially is the key that we'll be able to use moving forward. Then after that, we're going to be able to identify what are the key messages per section of that storyline that are going to be able to help us defend that. And really that'll start to shape what your outline is. And if you want a quick AI workflow for that, you could upload your insights, your research, or anything like that. And you can go into CoPilot or ChatGPT and you can say, look, what story structures work best for the insights or the hypothesis that I have? Then it'll go ahead and generate you essentially a template that you can start to use. So here you can then follow that narrative and storyline and start to build an outline. So this is an example of something that's called a mafia offer story, where it starts with the big setup. So similar to SCQA, it's the context is the start, or the situation. Then it moves into the problem or the confrontation. But as you see, it's got a couple brackets in terms of old way, job to be done, switching trigger. These are all things that I can fill in to start to really build my narrative. And once I built that, I can then translate that into slides. So my setup becomes my landscape. My confrontation becomes my problem. And then I can really start to tell that story. Now, we can set up an agent for that to be able to help us out, which will be based on the narrative that we're trying to build or shape, which we can say, okay, cool, whichever platform you're using, you can create that agent, put in the instruction of the prompt to say, hey, look, I'm trying to build a narrative. Suggest me a storyline. Work with me hand in hand. Don't just give me that outcome so that I can start to figure out what narrative works best. Because the reality is you need to be comfortable with the story you're telling. AI can't be comfortable with it. So you need to be able to defend each one of those points. Now, moving to the last point, which is around the first draft. Yeah. And the biggest issues that really come when we talk to clients on this is they're unclear of where to start and what kind of structure or content needs to be in which place to be able to support the right narrative that you're trying to say. We don't want to show the CEO 150 slides. We don't even want to show them 50. We want to give them the 10 or 15 that are going to work best. And we're also unsure what needs to be in the main deck versus what needs to be in the appendix. And especially for juniors or people that aren't used to doing lots of strategy decks, There's a pressure and anxiety that they feel for trying to get it right the first time. There's a really great quote that we had from one of the customers that we were talking to last week, which was the reality. The only thing the best compliment you can ask for is that's a good first draft. Not that it's going to be great, not that it's amazing, not that it's perfect. It's always just going to be a first draft, which is perfectly fine. So as we move in and we're thinking about how detailed does that first version really need to be, that's going to come from the narrative that we've kind of built out for ourselves. So what we've designed so far is we had our research, we simplified, and then we got to the point where we created a story narrative for ourselves. And here on the right-hand side, I want you to look at how that story's kind of been broken down into the top headers: the landscape, the problem, the solution, right? And if we're thinking about whatever narrative we chose, we should be able to follow that template until we have a nice story that we're able to put together. That's going to get me to a really good first draft of understanding. Now, for me, I like to do the headline method, which means that I like to like really big headlines, and I will essentially re-say the story to myself out loud over and over and over again until the story sounds right. Then I've got that narrative of everything I need. Now, while I'm putting together that narrative, what are the most compelling evidence to support the biggest points I have? And that's where I might need to go back into my research repository to pull information evidence, or I might need to ask ChatGPT or Claude to say, hey, can you find other benchmarks that match the strategic initiative or this perspective that I'm now putting forward, which we're able to do. And then anything that's not going to be really supporting the main part of your story, though all those things can essentially move into the appendix. So you can have your 150 slides, but keep your 10 tight. Keep your 15 tight for what you actually need. You know? Now, another quick AI workflow that I work on quite often is I need you to find me evidence for a strategic point. So in this one you see here, there's a thing that says we're at risk of global recession, right? But I might need to say, what stats support this statement in the market that I'm currently in? So then it'll go and do that research and it'll say, please cross-reference. I can go ahead and validate. I can try a couple different tools that I want to. And then it'll say, cool, give me that. It'll give me that stat. Now, what I also want to think about is, how do I get the opposing view of that? Is there other data that shows that this is not true? So even if it's not part of my storyline, I can include it in my FAQ or how I'm going to be talking about it moving forward. So I make sure I have all the supporting evidence that I need when I'm actually presenting my story. Now, the last bit on this is really interesting in terms of how we've discovered strategists kind of start to really use AI, or at least the best ones. And this isn't that people are going in and they're saying, hey, please deliver me an entire strategy deck. The reality is the AI will not deliver you anything close to what you're looking for. What we're finding is that a lot of people are working side by side as they're trying to get in the flow of working on the deck. So there's a couple things that you can actually do to be able to tell AI that I don't want you to complete the deck. I want you to only give me quick answers. I want you to work with me so that I can ask you impromptu things and we can move through the process together. So I don't need you to try to skip ahead. I want you to take all the information I'm giving you as I am working through the deck and I am thinking, because I am the strategist, and you are going to help me start to either find evidence or support for the points that I'm trying to make. And if I need some opposite positions, or if I'm going on the wrong direction, feel free to shout me so then we can start to work on this together. So that becomes a much more symbiotic relationship as using AI, which is actually the play that I would suggest everyone start to really use AI and start to use these strategy assistants. Now, the sample prompt or starter prompt that we have on that, and you can see on the right-hand side, there's a much larger prompt, and even that I think is like a third of what the prompt actually is. But on the left-hand side, you can see, look, you're a senior strategic consultant and a collaborative partner. This is a massive thing. Collaborative partner alongside a human consultant. Together, we're going to develop a strategic presentation. For the example that was Spotify, You actively participate in strategic thinking, content creation, and research analysis, and presentation building. You maintain a detailed database of all the information because we have our repository, and you're going to provide me hands-on collaboration. And in the longer detailed one, it would say that you're not going to essentially give me too much information. You're not going to lead me down an astray, whatever that might be. But the idea is that you've got it all kind of really coming together. Yeah. So just to put that in summary, in terms of this 4-step blueprint that we're putting together, that people are really starting to use AI in these best practices ways, using it to gather data, making sure that the data that you're gathering is validated, right? Or you're able to then summarize large amounts of findings that you've got, whether that be from interviews, whether that be from surveys, whether that be from any sorts of data, Excel sheets, whatever you've got. Then once you graduate from the basics of gathering data and summarizing findings, you start to move into more strategic work of really trying to figure out how I can pull in the right insights to simplify my message and to really think about my narrative. And if you're not someone who specializes in telling stories on a day-to-day basis, this is a really great superpower for you to have. Then finally, when you're thinking about that first draft, this isn't about saying, hey, generate me a first draft. It's about working hand in hand with AI to help you develop what that first draft could look like slide by slide. And if we think about the flip side of that, you end up with a bit of a 4-agent system. So whether you're in Claude or you're in ChatGPT, think about how you can build these 4 agents. And we have these prompts that we can share from your research agent, which is helping you gather all that information, sift through it. Your analyst agent, which is able to look across all the information that you've got. Your narrative agent, which has helped you really craft a story and a narrative that's going to really be important to the audience that you're talking to. And then you have your strategic CoPilot, which is working with you side by side as you really start to build the rest of that deck with all the supporting evidence you have that is from the research agent, the analyst, and really understanding what came from that narrative. So I want to thank you all so much. Let me know if you have any questions in the chat. I look forward to answering them.